All right, everybody, welcome to the Otherppl Show, a weekly podcast featuring in-depth interviews with today's leading writers. I'm Brad Listi here in Los Angeles. It's nice to be with you. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to this show wherever you tune in. You can also subscribe on YouTube. Follow the program on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and Blue Sky. So today is Friday, and we're going to be doing a flashback episode where I dig into the archives and share an outtake out of the past. Today, an outtake from episode 545, my conversation with author and poet Mark Leidner. Episode 545 first aired on October 3rd, 2018. Mark Leidner is a writer from South Georgia who currently resides in California. His books include a poetry collection called Returning the Sword to the Stone, a collection of short stories entitled Under the Sea, and a collection of aphorisms called The Angel in the Dream of Our Hangover. He has also written for the screen. He's a screenwriter. Mark Leidner posts his shorter writing on Twitter. Videos and photos can be found on Instagram, and his longer form writing can be found on Substack. A flashback to episode 545, my conversation with Mark Leidner, is coming up momentarily. A reminder before we get going that I have a weekly newsletter. Check it out over at bradlisti.substack.com and subscribe. You can also join the Otherppl Patreon community over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. Help keep this show going into the future. So once again, this outtake comes from episode 545, which aired on October the 3rd, 2018. A reminder that the full episode 545, is available in the feed, so if you like what you hear in this flashback and you would like to go in for the unabridged listen with Mark Leidner, just look for episode 545 wherever you get your podcasts. All right, here we go. This week's flashback, episode 545. A conversation with Mark Leidner.
Haiku, it seems small, so it wouldn't take that long, but it's almost impossible to write a good aphorism, and that's what's interesting about them.
Okay, so how do you, what's the difference between working on an aphorism versus working on a short story or a longer piece? I'm trying to imagine, because I've never written aphorisms before, I'm trying to imagine the process of composition. Is it a lot of just sitting there?
Well, I think at first that's what I thought it was when I was interested in it. I was like, well, okay, now just think deep about a thing. And I quickly realized that doesn't yield any good aphorisms. And what I came to, by trying to do it, and Twitter helped with this, was that it's not about trying to say something that is thoughtful or deep. It's more about just finding one verb or one word that is really complicated and paints a vivid picture, and then asking yourself, how could this relate to something else? So, like jigsaw puzzle, it paints such a complicated picture in your head, and then you think, what could a jigsaw puzzle be like? And so for me, it's an analogy game of thinking of a vivid image or word and then being like, what's something that's surprising that I could compare this to that is also somewhat truthful? So you end up where you end up with the little pithy truth that you have is a surprise to you, or is to me when I get there.
And a few, some of them have held up over the years.
Some of them.
But some of them you're like, no.
Yeah.
I guess that's natural.
Yeah, I think that it's like this, the risk of being wrong is very high in an aphorism, whereas in a lot of lyrical poetry, there's no right or wrong. You're not going out on a limb and staking this is what love is, or right. If it's good poem, usually you're not. But
right.
But with an aphorism, you're kind of, it's like a game of chicken. You want to say something that feels like you're stepping out on a limb, but it can't be so anodyne that, if I'm pronouncing that word right, I don't know.
I think you got it.
That those are my least favorite kinds of aphorisms that seem to be saying something truthful, but are just so vague or untruth, or like the author didn't go far enough and risk anything. Like those would be on, like little tea towel trinkets that you might buy and hang in your bathroom.
Well, and your publisher, Ken, who published that book of aphorisms, he just published a book that has aphorisms in it.
Yeah.
So he's tried that. I find that form thrilling when it works. When I read one that really hits. I don't know what it is, but I think there's something so cool about being that brief and that deep, or at least getting the way that it gets me thinking.
It's true. However, like the flip side is that they're very, or one of the things that initially attracted me to them is that I think they're looked down on by serious, literary critics or writers.
No wonder I like them.
Yeah, exactly. But they should be looked down on because they are like it's like candy almost. You can read a really good book of aphorisms and like, ooh, that's thoughtful. Oh yeah, history is like that. Oh yeah, experience is like that. And then, it's just a little dopamine hit that doesn't often resonate forever. Like I've read many, many books of aphorisms by like, what's his name? Cioran. I don't know how to pronounce it, but an awesome, truly fearless and often disturbing aphorist. But I don't remember any of them.
I could say the same thing about most books I've read.
Yeah, that's true.
My memory for I wish I had better recall for what I've read, but the truth is that very little sticks. But
it's okay, I think, to not remember the words, but the things that I do remember that come back to me when I'm in crisis, or that I rely on as, wow, I don't know what I'm doing with my life right now, or I'm really worried about this. The things that do float back to me are stories, or poems, but not aphorisms. I won't even remember a whole poem. I'll just remember that feeling like, oh yeah, that's the Second Coming poem, and that's this feeling, and I can use that somehow to. I don't remember the whole poem, but like I remember the feeling.
Do you have books, like you talk about this, but like you have books that you rely on, kind of like life rafts or whatever, when things go sideways? Like, are there tons of them, or are there just like a small few? Like, what are some books of you like that you've read that you feel that way about?
I think that often, really, when I'm really truly worried or afraid or depressed or something like that, I'll go all the way back to the Bible, or like parables of basically Christ's parables. Those stories, to me, always yield like that, calm me down. They sort of explain to me like, something that feels useful at the moment. So I love old religious texts, and in a way stripped from the religion around them, but the actual text. And I don't like open the Bible and read them. I'll just like, I have this document on a computer of like, parables from various gospels. I'm not sure what gospel they come from, but I'll sometimes reread them or try to like, I'm often inspired by them. I'll try to reformulate them in other contexts. Other books like that are like the Odyssey, or a lot of classics, and what else? I love myth, and I love texts that are literature but are considered religion or myth or things like that. In those, I find the most kind of depth and sustained like complexity often.
That's how I feel about like some Thoreau. Like, I guess I just read a biography of him, so he's fresh on my mind. But like this ambition that he had to sit down and write, like in his time, modern scripture. Like, that's a really high ambition.
Yeah.
But I wish more people did that, you know? Like, because he was going for the big fish. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that's a worthy pursuit, even if, like, you're, like, statistically doomed to failure, like, almost. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a high degree of failure, sort of like with aphorisms.
Totally. It's very, because it's like a dogmatic, or it lends itself to dogmatism, and that's it's so grotesque when you encounter it in, like, writing often, unless it's very complicated. And a lot of poetry is basically religious, musings, and half of the Bible or a lot of the Bible is just poetry. It's just Proverbs and Psalms and the poetry of a particular people. So I love it. I love it when poets today write verse that is in some way engaged in that and trying to be like a religious text. Because I wonder, it's only time passing is what I think usually makes something religion. And in the moment, when whoever was writing Psalms,
they're just annoying.
Right, exactly. They were just writing poems, and everyone was, probably booing them or ignoring them. But time, all the forces of history piled up, and those things became, the Word of God. And
so it's like okay. So let me just use a popular example, because I think about this sometimes. Like Mary Oliver. Mm-hmm. You ever read her?
I've read a little bit. I mean, I know some famous poem of hers.
Yeah, she's got a lot. She's like super popular insofar as a poet in America can be popular today. And I think that her critics sometimes knock her for that sort of like earnest dogmatism or like overt spirituality. And in my head, because I'm a fan, like I'm an unabashed fan. I love her poetry. Like it makes me feel like all warm inside, like in a genuine way, like not in a way that like afterwards you're like, oh, is that like a sugar high?
Right.
And so when you say time really is the thing that distinguishes a piece of literature from having that sort of gravity or whatever, I can see her work aging well. And that once you have the benefit of like decades and centuries, no one's going to be quite so miffed by that.
Let's say the world was destroyed, in some kind of apocalyptic event, or most of it was, and the few, people who survived, like, eating beans in cans and like cannibalism, like whatever it takes, like there's 10 people left on the planet. They're like, everything is burnt, and they find some tattered, generations later, living in this post-apocalyptic desert, they find some tattered paper that has a Mary Oliver poem on it, with no memory of who Mary Oliver was or how anything occurred before. That would definitely become a religious text, especially if they understood it and, could gain some insight about it. Like, oh my God, this piece of paper is telling us to relax, but everything around us is telling us not to relax. Right. This is holy.
There used to be birds.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so I don't know. I guess I just find myself cheering that sort of thing on, even when it misses the mark. Like I'm a huge fan of that pursuit, and I don't understand. There's I think sometimes, especially, there's something very urban, I guess, in my association. I feel like there's like this kind of cynical, like, okay, write a poem about a bird, or and some of those poems can really suck. I get that, but like, well, I think it's 100% appropriate to be grappling with like the wonders of the natural world as a human being. Like, it's so easy to miss. There's fucking birds flying around, like just the majesty of it and the mystery, like the deep mystery of what the hell's going on. Like I
agree. I mean, every leaf, every like vein of every leaf in the world is a miracle.
Yeah.
So it is like, the problem is, if that's all anybody ever says, it's a cliche, and it becomes like a way to avoid deep reflection. It's like, yeah, birds are beautiful. I'll put a bird up on it and wash my hands of having to worry about nature or think deeply about it or examine myself in light of it. But the pendulum swings away from nature, and nature poems are, gross and uncool and, redneck or somehow not urbane or something. But then whatever is the new thing will get played out, and nature will seem
a gritty confessional. God. Yeah, gritty confessional.
Nature. It's amazing. It's like it's a giant pendulum, and it's like whatever's uncool will soon become cool, and whatever's cool will soon become uncool.
So you can't worry about it.
And I like to find the things that are the most uncool and play with them and think about them, or try to, use them. Try to write a nature poem. That's try to write a good nature poem. What would that take? And I think I always learn a lot when I try to this is why I was attracted to aphorisms. They're not cool, but they're kind of cool now. Some people post aphorisms and have big exhibits and have following on Instagram of tens, thousands, or whatever. So it's just
could have been you, dude.
I don't want that.
So you talked about the Bible, having resonance for you. Were you raised with religion? Because you're from South Georgia.
I'm from South Georgia, so very much in the Bible Belt, and but I was raised Catholic.
As was I.
And very religiously, or very strictly. So,
what does that mean?
Well, maybe not very compared to some people, but we had to go to church on Sunday, no question. And my dad was kind of paranoid that, in our small little community, the worry in the family was that we would make too many friends with Baptists or Methodists, and that we might go Protestant. So that was a weird little feeling or thing to navigate then. And so I think we were even more trained to be Catholic and be good Catholics.
That's sad. I was raised Catholic, but never really... I went to a lot of church. I got confirmed and all that, but I never really responded well to it. I don't know the difference. What's the... What is the difference between a Catholic and a Protestant? How do you grade it out? What's the issue?
Wow. Well, it's funny. It reminds me a lot of the narcissism of small differences, and how I think human beings maybe hate each other more when they're very similar but only slightly different than if they're very different. And so... But technically, I guess a Catholic believes in what? Well, one way to think about it is the history of Europe, and at one point the Roman Empire was kind of all over Europe, and then they became Catholic. So Catholicism had this kind of imperial, high power, high wealth, it kind of represented the monarchy, the monarchists of monarchies. And then so when monarchies began to lose a little bit of steam, some people were like, why don't we just take what Jesus said and get rid of all the gold and the glitz and the power structure and the hierarchy and let Farmer Dan have a church. And Farmer Dan is now reading the Bible to Farmer Dan and all his friends. And what's wrong with that? And the Catholicism was like, that's not real. That's not. So they were protesting all the old rules that had calcified, I think, throughout the ages.
Uh-huh.
And it was a way of democratizing Christianity. So Protestants were kind of a democratizing...
You're selling me on Protestantism right now.
That's true. But I sympathize with both perspectives, and also with all other perspectives that are not Christian. But, there's also little things like Catholics have to go to confession to be forgiven for their sins, and
do you do
Protestants
a lot of that?
Are like, no, I don't often go to confession. I have a very...
Are you still practicing?
It's complicated. It's very... sometimes I'll go to church, and I'll often get angry with what is being said.
Yeah.
And then I'll be like, well, maybe I shouldn't go to church then, because I don't agree with that. And then I'll miss my mom or something, and
Is she no longer with us?
Yeah.
Oh.
And I'll go through some phase where I need some connection to something.
Uh-huh.
And I need to be part of something bigger than myself. So I'll go back and there'll be a beautiful song, and I'll sing it, and something I would never otherwise do, and participate in this community. And I see I'll go back to see the beautiful parts of church, and it's just very fluid for me.
Yeah. All right, there we have it. That is today's flashback. My conversation with Mark Leidner in episode 545. The episode first aired on the 3rd of October, 2018. If you would like to listen to the full conversation, the full hour with Mark Leidner in episode 545, just search for it wherever you get your podcasts. Episode 545 is there in full, waiting for you. To find out more about Mark Leidner and his work, visit markleidner.com. Follow him on Instagram, Twitter, and read his longer form work on Substack. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen. You can also subscribe on YouTube. Follow the show on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and Blue Sky. Sign up for my newsletter at bradlisti.substack.com. Join the Otherppl Patreon community over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. Help keep this show going into the future. If you have 2 minutes and you want to help me out a little bit, please give this show a rating wherever you listen. Write a little review. It helps the show find new listeners. If you would like to get an Otherppl t-shirt or join my book club, you can do that at the show's official website, otherppl.com. And if you would like to read my latest book, it is a novel called Be Brief and Tell Them Everything, available in trade paperback, ebook, and audiobook editions. I narrate the audiobook. So if you want to read my book, you can read my book. It is a novel called Be Brief and Tell Them Everything. So coming up on Sunday, my guest will be Colombe Schneck, author of a new book called Swimming in Paris. It is a collection of 3 autofictional novellas available in translation from Penguin Press. It was translated by Lauren Elkin, who incidentally has guested on this show, and was also translated by Natasha Lehrer. Colombe Schneck coming up on Sunday. Stay tuned.